Welcome to the Marlboro County Board of Education special call meeting. At this time, we're going to ask for an invocation from Mr. Flowers.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for this day. We thank you for all the blessings in life. We ask you just guide us and direct us as we conduct business for the Marlboro County School District. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need a motion to call the meeting to order.
So move, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, let it know by raising your right hand. Marlboro County Board of Education special call meeting now called to order. This time we're going to have our public hearing from 5 to 5:30, hearing fiscal year 25-26 budget. Ask anybody to have any comments. At the time, please do so. We ask everybody to be respectful and to make sure that we keep the order decently in order in our comments. It's time. The floor is open for public hearing.
Does that mean anyone can speak? I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Public hearing.
Let them know they have a 3-minute limit.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Just coming on behalf of the town of Clio, obviously we have a very small community there, and any type of news where we have that may bring a major impact to our town, that's big news for us. And possibly losing our school there in a community that we're fighting to keep above water, above ground, that's a major ordeal for us. And so I know you guys have your backs against the wall. There's things that you have to do to make things happen. There's decisions that have to be made business-wise. There's a business side of everything. But, if you look at the long stand, number one, obviously the kids, but two, you have major impacts on a community that is trying to grow, to try to make a better town, a better place for Marlboro County. You guys have seen what we've been doing in Clio. We've made strides in the last 2 years to do great things there. And losing a school that has a significant impact on our community is a major blow. That type of thing. There's obviously other plans and things that could go on there, but I feel like there's a bond, a special place there at Clio Elementary School that takes place, and a lot of great people in place there that run it, a lot of great teachers, the children. In the future, we may have people leave Clio to move to a closer place so they can go to school and don't have to do different things. So we want our school. We want to be able to have a school in Clio, and I'm just coming on behalf of the town of Clio to you guys, as far as support. And I realize, like I said, there are things that you have to do, but coming from the mayor, we want a school there in Clio, and we want your help with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm a resident in Bennettsville, South Carolina, and there were just a few items.
Excuse me, could you give your name?
I'm sorry, Chevette Hancock. And there were just a few items I wanted to speak about. I know one of the options were to move 3rd through 5th grade to Blenheim schools. Currently, Blenheim is a uniform school, so it's not a decision that I would like. However, if that's the decision that's being made, I'm asking for consideration on the uniforms, because I know I'm not the only parent who's already purchased my child's clothes because she's currently not in a uniform school. And I know sometimes things like that can be overlooked, and we only have a few weeks left before school begins. Another thing, Mr. McNeil, I know last week you mentioned about 10 minutes on the bus ride, but my house is 20 minutes from Blenheim School. So I don't understand the 10 minutes that it would take, or if you were stating it's going to be an additional 10 minutes. So just asking for clarification on that. My daughter currently attends Bennettsville Intermediate School. I understand that that's one of the smallest schools, but in my opinion, it's been one of the most impactful schools. Moving here in 2023 from Orangeburg, she was very limited on her reading. That school has brought her a long way, to the point where my daughter has never made honor roll. Not only did she make honor roll this past school year, she had one of the highest averages in ELA at times throughout the school year, not every 9 weeks, but that was a big accomplishment within itself. Bennettsville Intermediate is our only STEM school in the district, so if we close that as a school, will we lose that? They are also, I think, the only school in the district that made some type of improvement on the report card. So I think it's going to be sad to see that school close. Bennettsville is the capital of Marlboro County, and it looks like we're going to have the majority of kids traveling. So I ask that you consider that when making your decision as well. And if it is an option for 6th to 8th grade to come to the high school, I understand some people have security concerns about that, but how can that be a security concern if 3rd through 5th grade being with 6th through 8th grade is not a security concern? The same way they would be separated in Blenheim, I don't understand how they can't be separated here as well. Bennettsville needs a K through 8 school. I know it takes money, but while we're looking at everything, maybe that's something that can be considered for future also. And finally, this is for the parents. We're putting all this on the board. We're putting everything in schools. We're complaining, but what are we doing? Are we out there volunteering? Have we gone on the district website and filled out the application to volunteer to help in these schools as well? Because if we haven't, then we need to, because it takes a village. I filled out my application. I was already in the schools on the School Improvement Council at the primary school as well as at the intermediate school. So I'm trying to do my part, but I've also filled out my application to volunteer and asking other parents and members of the community to step up and do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing, Mr. Chairman? I have one question on the first reading. Tim McNeil, parent, community member. On the first reading of the budget, should have not included millage increase language, or would that be added as you go through if y'all see you're not going to be able to make up the $600,000 shortfall? Thank you.
We got it scheduled for 30 minutes.
This is the time for the public to speak up between now and 5:30. We will sit here and wait if anyone has the thoughts to come forward and share something with us. So this is your time, and I'm sorry there's not more people here, but this is your time to speak on this budget. So please, if you'd like to say something, now is the time. Thank you.
I'd like to remind the newcomers to the meeting that we are now in the public hearing portion. Those that just arrived, if you so desire to speak, now is your time.
We have about 12 minutes remaining. Yes, sir. We have 5 minutes left, so you can take the podium. Yes, sir.
Give your name.
David Locklear. The biggest thing that I'm hearing in the community is there any way we could ever get a Q&A forum with y'all? Is there any way possible we could ever do that?
You get what?
A Q&A forum? Because there's so many questions that people in the county would love to ask and be able to get answers to, or some kind of transparency to. There's a lot of, I don't want to place blame on anybody, but there's a lot of money that's been spent that's very questionable in the eyes of the people in the community. And we'd love to get some answers. Love to get some answers. Is that a possibility? Can we ever get a Q&A forum?
That would be a question that the administrative staff would have to answer on that, because they're going to be the ones reviewing your questions and giving you answers. It would not be the school board. We may be a part of the process, but we would not be the people that would be getting that from you and returning the answers. So that would have to go through the district office and our superintendent.
Is there some way that I could get some kind of promissory that y'all would maybe
Not
set up
tonight.
a night for us to do that?
Not tonight. I doubt it very seriously.
Oh, I know it wouldn't be tonight.
Okay.
You know, I know it wouldn't be tonight. Is that something that y'all would work for in the future, to work with the people?
Mr.
Let's give
Locklear,
you a point of order.
No, I don't see why that wouldn't be a good
Point
thing
of
to
order,
do.
Mr. Drake. We're hearing and we're recording what everyone's concerns are.
Yes, sir.
And when we're here in a public hearing, we can't just throw out answers to the public. We are recording it, and all of it will be turned over to the administration, and it'll be prepared and given back to the board, and we will take a look at it from there. But we cannot just give answers out tonight.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't, that's nothing I would expect tonight. It's just, I know it's something that a lot of people in the community and the county would love to have.
Yes, sir.
And,
Appreciate the question, Mr. Locklear.
yes, sir. And I don't envy any of y'all, and I know y'all got a tough job. And good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, this ends our public hearing portion of our agenda. Just want to thank each and every one of you for your comments and your questions. Just want to let you all know that none of your comments or questions has fallen on deaf ears, not just from tonight, from all our previous meetings, and we appreciate the input from the community. And thank you for bearing with us as we go through this process of trying to put together a budget for our upcoming school year. Thank you so much. Okay. Notification to the news media has been made. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. At this time, I need an action for approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda as it is.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor, let it be known, raising the right hand. The agenda has been approved. Need a motion now to go into executive session, discuss personnel matters, recommendations, reports, employee matters, and legal matters.
Mr. Chair, I move that we go in executive session to discuss personnel matters, recommendations, report on employee matters, and legal matters.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor, let me know, raise the right hand. We're now in executive session.
session.
Motion to go back open session. I have a second.
I second.
All in favor, let it be known by raising your right hand. We're now back in open session. No decision was made, no action was taken in executive session.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a recommendation that we accept the one certified recommendation and the one certified resignation that was presented to us by Dr. Tiller.
Motion for one certified recommendation and one
Certified resignation.
certified resignation.
I second.
Have a second. All in favor, let them know, raise your right hand. It has been accepted.
I oppose, sir. You want to go for the record? I oppose.
Okay. All in favor again? Okay. 7. 2 opposed.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you. Okay. Board item for discussion. Budget update, Mr. Kwanzaa Benjamin.
We're having a few difficulties. We're trying to get the PowerPoint up. Should be up in just a moment. Okay. Do I need to mute mine?
Recording in progress.
Can you go?
Good evening, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Coachman, Dr. Tiller, Mr. McNeil, ladies and gentlemen of the board, at this time I'll go through the second reading of our budget for fiscal year 25-26. Mr. Davis, will you please go to the next screen? Okay, where we are, the state has not finalized the budget, and this is the information that we have as of now that relates to this reading for the fiscal year 25-26. Our teacher minimum starting salary is proposed to start at $48,500. The bus driver salary has a 2% increase, that's an increase to the state minimum. And as it relates to our health care costs, that is a 4.6%. That is the cost of the district, not the cost of the employee or the staff that's enrolled in the health care program. Next screen, Mr. Davis. Here is our revenue budget, proposed revenue budget for fiscal year 25-26. We have a total revenue budget of $42,781,116.71. This is comprised of local revenue of $11,035,000 and state revenue of $30,342,662.12, which gives us a total of proposed revenue of $41,377,662.12, which gives us a shortfall balance of reaching that $42 million of $1,430,454.59. Next screen, Mr. Davis. As it relates to our expenditure budget, we have a total of $42,781,116.71. This is comprised of our salaries of $24,244,500. $512.60. Benefits of $12,772,556.66. Purchase services, $3,439,004.47. Supplies and material, $1,959,122.73. Equipment at $73,400 and other objects at $292,520.25. And if you look to the far right, this is a pie chart that shows the percentages of what our expenditures relate to. As you can see, our salaries and benefits comprise of about 87% of our budget. Next screen, Mr. Davis. How did we get here? These are actual real numbers that we put into our system. We use Smart Fusion that handles all of our HR matters, finance matters. That's where we put in all the figures. And the proposed budget is based off option D, which the board approved at our last board meeting. Here's a brief summary of what option D comprised of. Number one, the consolidation of schools that include Bennettsville Primary, Blenheim Elementary Middle School, and Clio Elementary School. Number two, a reduction of days for various positions. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not, well, BIS is included in that, I'm sorry, I left that off by mistake. Number two, a reduction of days for various positions. Number three, freezing of salaries except for teachers. Attrition, we're still monitoring that because that changes from week to week. Number five, we'll fill vacancies within the district. And number six, we will continue to reduce budgets across the district. The next three slides is, Mr. Davis, would you go to the next slide? The next three slides is just a review of option D. This is the same information that was shared in our last board meeting. Number seven is to go to the next screen, Mr. Davis. That's the second section. And can you go to the next screen, Mr. Davis? That's the third part of that slide. That's the same information that we shared. Next screen, Mr. Davis. As it relates to our salary scales, our teacher and our bus driver scales, for these particular positions, the State Department, they provide funds to pay our certified teachers and our bus drivers. With that, we have to, it's a state requirement that all school districts must pay our teachers and bus drivers at the state minimum that they provide every year. Any amount over the minimum, the school district is responsible. And of course, that has to be approved by the board if at any time teacher salaries want to go over the minimum as well as bus drivers' salaries. Next screen, Ms. Davis. As it relates to our teacher salary scale, the proposed budget which we plugged into the system is at $48,500. This is a $1,500 increase from last year. And the state is providing funds for those. And of course, if the district wants to pay teachers above the state minimum, that has to be a board requirement. And of course, the district is responsible for those funds. As it relates to our bus driver salary scales, our current starting salary for our bus drivers is $17.61. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, next screen. I'm sorry. As it relates to our bus driver scale, we start our bus drivers at $17.61. And the state requirement, Mr. Davis, will go to the next screen, is $11.65, which is well below what our district is providing. So if, again, if we decide to pay additional 2%, which the state did increase to the state minimum, we will be responsible for that overreach. Next screen, Mr. Davis. As it relates to our fund balance, as of our audit, 23-24, we have a fund balance total of $7,370,245. That puts us at 16%. For our budget for 24-25, the board approved $0.6 million to come out of fund balance to balance the budget. If this entire amount is taken out as far as it relates to the audit, the end results of the audit, if the $4.6 million in totality is used, it will leave us with a fund balance of $2,698,515.22 which will put us at 6%. Of course, the state requires us to have a fund balance of 8.33%. As of April 2025, this is the document that I've been providing with you for the past couple months. As of April 25, our estimated fund balance is $6,744,642, which puts us at 15%. Again, this is an estimate because of the lag with the reports that we received from the county treasurer. We are a month behind, but as the months progress, I will continue to provide those estimates up until the audit is complete. Once the audit is complete, we will have a true fund balance. There is a possibility, a 50-50 chance that we may use the $4.6 million, or we may not. We will not know until once the audit is complete. Next slide. If there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them. If there's something I can answer, I'll try my best. If not, I'll get back with you.
Questions, anybody?
Yes, I do have a question. Ms. Benjamin, you stated that the state have not completed their budget yet. That's correct?
Yes, sir. They have not finalized and approved the budget. That's correct.
So so we don't really have the final numbers for the state. We got a good estimate what we're going to get from the state, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. And how does that look for the state house for them passing their budget on time? Does it look like they're going to pass their budget on time?
Well, they have to pass it by 30th, so they're still meeting usually. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think they usually pass it around July, part of July. I haven't had a chance to check today to see where they're standing at right now. But once they pass that budget, they will send out some information in the news media so that everyone will be aware of that the budget has passed.
I got a quick question for you. The last couple of meetings, and I still do not quite understand it, so there's a $1.9 million somewhere floating around that I keep hearing that we give up or quit with Kelly's service, we quit with the grass cutting services, this type of stuff. So that 1.9 million, is that still floating that we might still get that, or is that a dream that's gone?
Okay, with the 1.9 million, that's the amount of funds that we have spent on all those services. So with savings, you can't add savings, that's not revenue. That's basically saying the amount of funds that we would not be spending in the budget once we cut those services. Just think about if you go shopping at Bill and you buy an item that's on sale, you'll get a receipt that says you saved $200. In actuality, you didn't. You only spend $100 for that particular item. So that's what it equates to the savings.
So that 1.9 is already added into our budget. That 1.9 savings is already added into the budget numbers that you're giving me.
It's not added in there. It's basically we're stating that we're going to save that amount by we're not going to be spending that amount out of.
Okay, so it's taken from the expenditures.
What was that?
It was taken from the expenditures.
Yes,
okay,
sir.
all right.
Right. If we continue those services, that if the budget will be 1.9 further in the higher expenditures.
I'm trying to find some money for you.
Oh, I understand.
Could you speak for a moment on our county revenue, if you could?
Yes, sir, I can. The numbers that I provided, I did get those from our county. I did watch one of the board meetings, and we are losing about 1.3 million in fee in lieu. They did a reallocation of the split county normally gets and gives to the school district, so they cut back a tremendous amount of funds that we would be receiving. So that hurt us pretty tremendously.
How much they cut back?
What was that?
How much did they cut back?
$1.3 million. We'll only be receiving $325,000 for a fee in lieu.
How much was the total fee? How much was the total fee in lieu that the county got in?
I didn't hear your question, Mr. Coachman.
How much of the total? What's the total fee in lieu that the county received?
$3 million.
And how much we getting out of the $3 million?
We'll only get 10% of that, around $325,000.
And
I just want to make that public knowledge.
And I think that's something that we need to be conscious of on the board, because even when the county doing the economic development and they talking about these different projects coming in, they're not paying property taxes. That's that fee in lieu instead of property tax. When we pay property tax, the school district get their fair share for operation revenue and our debt service millage. We getting our correct amount out of that. But when it comes to fee in lieu, we can't really, unless we get a different relationship with the county on this. We can't depend on it. Right, we can't depend on that. That's why when we talk economic development, I think it would be nice if the school district was at the table when they're negotiating these deals with these new industries that promise to come. Because anytime we do a fee in lieu, it do take money out of the operating costs of a school district, and I know they promise jobs, but sometimes they don't hold up to the bargain that they say. They get the tax exemption, but then don't provide the jobs sometimes. But we hoping that they pay people enough that they can buy a house so we can still get some tax revenue. But I just wanted to make sure we had that clear there on that, how that goes. But with that being said, Mr. Benjamin, in our budget, and I know we looking at some other ways of probably coming up with some more revenues, and I know it's just a gut feeling, and you said it looked pretty good for the fund balance going, but with the
backup one,
with the projected assessment, do you feel that the district will receive more money with the new tax assessment?
Yes, sir. We will receive some additional funds based on what I received from the county, and I think Dr. Tiller may have shared that information with you. They're looking to, the school district could possibly receive an additional $700,000 with the reassessment that they're going through this year. $700,000 is a big difference between 1.3 million. I mean, it's a little bit more, but that 1.3 million cut reduction in revenue is a tremendous cut to the district.
Okay, I've got a quick question. On your estimate for April 2025 estimated fund balance, how did you arrive at that figure of 6 million plus? I'm just trying to figure, because I see the figure above it here is 2,698,000. So where, I mean, and it doesn't match up with the 7 million. So where did that figure come from?
Fund balance is calculated by percentage of your budgeted expenditures. So that's the percentage. You take your budgeted expenditures and you multiply it by 8.33, and that's how you get that total.
Okay. I'm still not quite following what you're saying, but on 23-24 audit, we had a fund balance of $7,370,245, which was 16%. We approved using the $4,671,000, and it came out $2,698,000, and that's what we have going forward. But as of April, you're saying the estimated fund balance was $6,744,000. So that $6,744,000 is in place of the 7,370.
Correct, because
okay.
I misunderstood your question. Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
But see, that 2.6 million is That's just an estimated, it's as if the year is complete.
Okay, so it's actually lower than what we were anticipating, okay.
Right, yes, sir. Did I make that clear enough for you?
Yeah, I got you now. I was just trying to figure out why those figures were different, but it's lower because we use more, is what you're saying. Okay, I got you.
Right, yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's correct. Any other questions?
Well, I just want to say this, since you said that 6, 7, that's the end of April, we're in June now, and we don't have an estimate for May as of yet, but I definitely don't know how much more gonna come out of it, but I'm just thinking possibility our number could look better than that 2.6 at the end if we don't use that, all of that 4.671.
It's a possibility, but you know,
I just want to have some hope.
I'm there with you, Mr. Thomas.
Okay.
But once we get those numbers, we definitely will share them with the board so that everyone will know where we're staying. That's my goal. I will make sure I share that information with you all each month.
Well, before we end this discussion on this, what I'm still hearing is the funding is still fluctuating now until we get hard numbers, correct?
That's correct. And also, when we first started giving you all these options, the numbers have changed since then as well. Yep.
Okay.
Expenditures are still coming in. We're still having people resigning, so all your numbers and everything, projections, even as you can see with the information from the county, that changed from when we first started giving you options A, B, and C. So it's ever changing. During the budget, you're just going based off projections, off what if, and that's the only thing that we can go off.
And from what I'm seeing, we're still not balancing. Even with option D, which we're talking about tonight, we're still not balancing the budget. Correct?
That's correct. That's correct, because we don't have the revenue that equals to the amount of expenditures that we're projecting.
And let me just ask this question. I know you wasn't here, and I do recall when the district conducted a RIF years ago. And normally when you do that, it's because you have a shortfall of revenue, and depending on when it occur, sometimes it come out of the blue and expenses happen, and you have to do a RIF. But I know there has been cases where people passed budgets and you still ran into a financial hardship where RIF still had to be conducted. Is that correct?
That's possible. Yes, sir. That's possible. There are some financing options that I've been taking a couple of classes, working on my certification, tax and anticipation notice. A lot of districts get those whenever they're in a tight cash flow bind. As it relates to that stretch from August to December, if cash flow is tight, a lot of districts will borrow off their future taxes that they anticipate around January, and you can pay those funds back in 3 installments, and it has to be paid back by April 15th. So that is an option. We will have to consult with our bonds council, Compass Municipal advisors, as well as Ms. Frank Heiser with her firm, of course, because they handle any type of bonds that we do as referendums as well. So we can actually reach out to them and see what our options are and go from there.
It sounded like you did say it have to be repaid back by April, correct?
Yes, sir. April 15th.
So it really would be minimum interest, kind of like on that loan, wouldn't it? Because you're not really holding the year.
If I'm not mistaken, it's comparable, a very low interest rate for the school district. And I'm sure, I our bond counsel can explain all that to us and let us know what our options are as it relates to the interest rate.
I got one more quick question. I guess me and Mr. Tom's kind of hogging the floor, but I got one more quick question. The budget that I'm seeing here, total revenue budget for 24-25 was 45 million. With, I guess with option D, the total revenue budget for 25-26 is 39.4. Now, is that 6% to 2,698,000? What is that based on? Is that based on the 39 million?
The 2.6.
Well, you're showing a fund balance left over of 6%, and we know we need a little better than 8%. And I'm saying that fund balance, is it based on that 39,403,000? That's what we need. Is that 26?
No, 45. No, sir. That's actually based off of 24-25.
So that's based on the 45.
45.
So
45.
that 2698 may be greater than 6% of this new budget of 39,403 if we go with option D.
Yes, sir. That's a possibility.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I know we need a little better than 8%, and that's why I'm asking that question. It could move up. Okay. It should move up.
Yeah. Good possibility.
Yes, sir. Or down. That's correct. Or down. Either way.
Any other questions?
Think that 2.6?
No, sir.
No other questions? All right. Board business action, second reading of school year 2025-26 budget.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I move that we approve the second reading of the 25-26 budget pending additional funding source.
A motion to approve the second reading of, is that D?
Yep, well, I'm just going off what it said there. It said 20, this is the budget.
25-26
budget, pending additional funding sources.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second to approve the second reading of 2025-26 budget pending funding source.
Do we have a little bit of discussion now?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I'd like to point out on this is, I'm understanding what Mr. Thomas said, that we're going to be exploring some more funding sources.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully, before we approve any options at all. And I want to make sure the public knows that we are looking at option D, all the options, and we're looking at option D, but nothing is being approved tonight because we're still looking for other funding sources for our school system. And I really want to make sure that that's apparent to everybody.
Let's clarify it all together, Mr. Driggers. The second reading is about option D, but we are exploring, we're open to other options pending the sources, but this is off option for option D. It's the second reading for that pending source.
And again, we have 3 readings, so it is not approved yet. It won't be approved until the 3rd reading.
That's right.
We're still trying to find ways to make everything work for our district.
Okay. And give them directive to talk to funding sources, and we should set a date real soon to come back to the table to try to come up with a 3rd reading.
I have a question about option D. We were handed a piece of paper at the last meeting, and it wasn't on the board, that said, option D, do not allow any more kids to enroll outside their zone school. If you have a student that's already enrolled out of their district, it will not affect them, but no new students. Is that included in option D?
I have to ask.
Yes.
I think it
Yes,
was.
It was. Yeah, I thought it was.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is.
So you're doing away with school choice?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, let me just make a comment.
Yes.
You have to, and here's the reason why. Is if you just allow parents to carry their kids to any school, then naturally, if you lived in Bennettsville and you had a kid at Bennettsville Primary and a 7th grader at Blenheim, and you worked in Laurinburg, the easiest thing for you to do as a parent is make one stop in McCall, because you got K through 8 there. And if we don't stop it, then McCall we could be overloaded, and it'll be the same way in Wallace.
But I think that would be wrong to say you're doing away with school choice.
That's true.
Because you got to look at the school choice law.
Right.
In school choice. School choice law say that you can take your child out of a failing school and put them in another school. You can't take your child and take them to a school that is failing, already failed on report card. And so we have that going on. We have people taking children not to a passing school. You're taking them where parents feel comfortable with them being. But it's not taking away school choice, because we can't take that away, because that's the law. But right. we can set up, as a district, we can set up boundaries where people have to go, because some districts only have, we got several counties that's down to a primary, elementary, middle, and high, like Saluda and different counties, like some of this other county. And Marlboro is heading in that direction. Believe it or not, we're heading in that direction. No matter how much the public want things to go back in the past, it's not going to happen. We're losing 75 to 100 children every year. And it's not because people are moving. People are not having kids. Our community is shrinking, and we know that. And until we improve the economic development and get people to move in, and new families to come, and people start having kids, we're going to continue to go down. If you all remember, this high school, 2,600 students. We down to 900. You know, I come from a large family. In my day, my mama had 13, right? I shouldn't have told that on television here, right? But that's what it was. People not having kids like that anymore. And we just got to be honest with it. You know, the numbers are going to drop this year, probably about 75 to 100, and they're going to drop next year. And the year after that, they're going to drop some more. Because, I mean, looking at the estimates of what we got in first grade now, second grade, third grade, you know, by the time a child starting from kindergarten to the time they get in 12th grade, if you track those children, by the time they get to 12th grade, a lot of them are gone. Some of them then dropped out, some of them then moved, some of them. You track 200 children from first grade and see how many make it to 12, right? The numbers are declining. And it's not due to our fault. It's not due to our fault. It's not due to the people in the community. It's just what we're left with. Industries have closed. Some of the young people are graduating. We just graduated 200 the other day.
Right.
Some bright kids, 85 undergraduates or more.
That's right.
A lot of them had social degrees already. We are doing the right things in the district. We are. Our children are smart. But the thing of it is, we don't have a lot of stuff to offer them here. And the little resources that we do have left, whether we like it or not, whether the public like it or not, we got to pool our small amount of resources that we have together and do the best by our people we can. We hadn't raised taxes on our citizens from the school board since 2014. Since 2014, while other districts and other counties have been raising theirs. We've been doing what we could to balance our budget, try to make things where we can move people. But we've taken money out of our fund balance. We've taken money that we've had set aside for a rainy day, and we're down. We can no longer do that. Every year, the cost of operating schools goes up. Every year, the state raised. We got salary scales. Every year, they go up. You still got to pay your people, and there's nothing you can do about it. Even if we cut everything, those salaries, that you saw where the state is doing it, the bus driver, and these people have degrees. They go to school, they get another degree, you got to pay them on their scale. There's nothing we can do about that. Money's not just being thrown in the wind. I've seen on Facebook where people are talking about, oh, they eating chicken salad. Chicken salad's not going to balance the budget if we stop buying chicken salad. You know, different things like that. I've seen on there, they're wasting money on there. Money's not being wasted. It may be a time or two before we got this administration in place that things may not have been up to par. And the citizens have a right to know. The citizens have the right to know that things wasn't always up to par. But we are fixing things. Our audit shows that this board here is fixing things. It may not have been fixed before we got here, but we was elected to fix it. Each one of us represent over 3,000 people. And I stand here to try to do best by all of them. I know we have parents in the community that worry about where their child may go to school. I get that. I understand that. But we have 3,300 children. I can't, as a whole, I can't sit here and make a decision based on what's going to be good for one family. I can't do that in all good conscience. I got to think about all the children in the district and how we, as a board, need to try to put together the best plan we can to make sure our children are going to be able to compete in this world. You know, we can spend a lot of time looking in that rearview mirror about what it used to be, and we're going to run off the road because we're not watching out for the future.
So I have a question to follow up with that. Does that affect siblings of children who already attend outside of district?
No, I don't think so. It wasn't specified.
Well, I'm going to say that something that, Ms. Pruitt. You know, we're the board, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
I'm asking what the intent was.
No, what I'm saying is, our job, the superintendent, they operate day to day. They handle it administratively. But if it's something that we want to change as a board, we have to do it as a board, and the way we change things in the district as a board is through policy, right?
That's right.
We set the policy on how and where children go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So
you're right.
If we got something that we want to happen in our district, as a board, we put it on the table and we handle that through policy. And we write a policy. We are the legislative policy-making committee. We write a policy, we send it up, have it reviewed, it come back, we have our 3 readings, and then that's the policy.
So currently, we have a policy that says that we have school choice.
So
effectively, we would have to vote that down then.
No, I was telling you what school choice is. See, school choice is not, I just take my child. Anyway, when the law No Child Left Behind came back,
No, we have a school district policy, not a state policy. I'm not talking about the state policy. I'm talking about our school district policy.
I was like Dr. McLeod. I know you was in the district a long time with
May I make a suggestion?
with the No Child Left Behind.
Why don't we put that as part of what we look into for our next reading to make sure we understand exactly what our school choice policy says. Dr. Tiller, would you please bring that policy to us so we can read it and look at it and make sure we understand it all as a school board?
I think we already know it.
It's okay. Let's bring it out one more time and look at it, and that way we've got it covered if we just all look at it together. Okay? That'd be okay?
Yeah, that'd be okay. But one thing we're gonna need to know is, I'm gonna just say McCall has the capacity of 650 students. Every kid's in the desk, but we don't need 650 kids in the desk starting in July. We need to at least maybe 10%, 5%, leave some desks open in case a grandmother has to take in her 2 children and raise them. They live in McCall. I think they should be able to go to McCall. But if every desk is full, then she's stuck with getting her kids to Bennettsville or Blenheim. But she lives in McCall, and I don't think that's fair to her. But it's something we'll definitely discuss some more.
Yeah, we could agree to discuss that, and I know it does affect the budget somewhat, but that is a situation that should be reviewed maybe outside of a budget workshop or a budget like this. It's something, that a policy that we need to review and look at and make sure we have it correct. And I agree 110%, and I'm not trying to be difficult either, but we got to get a budget put in place before the end of this month.
I agree. We got to get a budget.
Let's start right now then.
The reason I'm bringing that up is you keep saying we have the budget to approve and a budget to get in place, but when you throw a stipulation like that in there with that option which balances the budget, then you need to address it right away.
I agree with addressing it right away, because you can't just let it go and then talk about it in November and we're already full in McCall.
Right.
Then you don't, somebody moves there we had a pastor to come from Oklahoma because we're in between pastors. He's got 3 kids, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and 8-year-old. Well, if he moves here in October and every desk is full, where's his kids going to school? He lives right on Main Street, McCall. It's not fair to him to have to move his kids to Bennettsville, and we got kids from all over the district filling up them desks because it's convenient for the parent to make one stop in McCall or Wallace, because you got K through 8 They don't want to go to Bennettsville Primary and out to Blenheim.
Well, so are we saying we only want to change that sentence because we're still in the reading portion? So
Reading portion what?
For in regards to the reading, it's nothing in stone. It's still reading.
No, I think that question can be dealt with, like we're saying, in a policy that govern the whole thing on that. Because you have a policy that take care of attendance.
Until we handle that policy, I think that line should be taken off of option D.
I definitely don't. Because I'm telling you, you could have kids hanging off the wall in McCall because of convenience. Parents will not, if they live in Bennettsville, if I lived in Bennettsville and I had a 3rd grader and an 8th grader, and I lived in Marlboro, I wouldn't carry them to Bennettsville and Blenheim. I'd make one stop in McCall, drop them both off, and go to Marlboro. And everybody else would too, if you give them that option. But if you give them that option, you have 800 students in McCall, and we're going to be back to, like we got 170 in Clive.
Let me ask a question. So those that are already, say for instance, living in Bennettsville, their children in McCall, will those children still continue to be able to go to McCall with that policy in place, or are we just talking about new students that want to come in and enroll in?
Well, it says that the new students, but I'm asking about their siblings.
Well, that's be new students, so I agree with that.
What if you have a sibling that's getting ready to go to kindergarten? You're going to make them go to Bennettsville and the other ones go to Wallace?
Yeah, that's the policy said. I mean, that's what we get. Yeah.
You're not going to make it.
So then, this is why I'm bringing this up. This is why I'm bringing this up, because to me, option D overloads Blenheim School. So if you are going to do that, then you're going to have children coming back from McCall, coming back from Wallace, and you're going to overload the plan for D for Blenheim School even more. You're going to have a greater number of students going to Bennettsville Primary and Bennettsville and Blenheim than you're anticipating.
But Blenheim, what I'm getting at, Blenheim is not overloaded.
Nope.
I disagree.
It's like a 1,400 capacity at Blenheim.
You might have a 1,400 capacity, but you only have 35 classrooms, and whenever y'all gave us the numbers of the students, how you break it, it doesn't add up. You have every single classroom is going to have 25 and more students in it with option D.
Well, if they have 25 or 30, they still
And then you're going to have even more if you cancel the school choice policy.
You know, that whole while I went to school, and I know that's in the rearview mirror. And before we consolidated the high school, there were attendance zones, and you could not go out of your attendance zone.
That's true.
I lived in District 8, and I went to Clio School. You know, and if you live in District 3, your kids go to District 3. You live in District 1, your children go in District 1. That's the way it was, you know. But now, we looking at school choice was brought out so parents could give their children a quality education in passing school. School choice wasn't about I can take my child anywhere I want to. And that's what parents are doing, and we've allowed that in the county. But that really wasn't the intent with school choice. When they start passing school choice on the federal level, it was about giving parents the option to take their children out of failing school districts so they can go to another one. That's what it really was about. It wasn't about putting them in the car and saying, I'm in Bennettsville, I'm gonna go to Clio, or I'm gonna go to Blenheim. It was about really giving parents an option to go to another district that wasn't failing. It wasn't so much about, I'm just gonna pick out something convenient. That was the real deal behind that.
So this is a product of previous boards doing, there should have been a K-8 Bennettsville school built in Bennettsville, because Bennettsville has the largest population. So you're telling the parents that they have to send their kids to Blenheim, but they can't choose to send them to Wallace or McCall.
There won't be room, Nikki.
I understand that, but so you're telling them they can't go to McCall or Wallace, but you got to send them to Blenheim.
You don't understand. If there's not room, that's what I'm trying to tell you. If there's not room, they can't go. That's what I'm saying.
There's room right now.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that.
Well, you know,
that close to the numbers, but
I definitely would love
if we don't do something with it, and you know as well as I do, you're an adult, you know as well as I do, we could do stuff that is convenience for us.
I want to read what I wrote down. To me, it looks like more kids need to be making school choice, not fewer, because Bennettsville Primary has 87 less kids than the entire McCall school, and that's from 3K through 3rd, whereas McCall has pre-K through 8. So for 8 grades, they only have 87 less. Bennettsville Primary has 87 less kids. Wallace actually has 147 less students across all 8th grades than Bennettsville Primary has by itself.
But you got to look at the capacity of the school.
There you go.
Wallace is a much bigger school.
All I'm saying, I know the capacity of McCall. I don't know the capacity of Wallace or Bennettsville. I know Blenheim, they just sent it out as 1,400, what it said. But I know the capacity of McCall, and I'm telling you, when you fill up every desk, and then you got people that, just like with your situation where a sibling, if all the classes are full, and then you have a sibling that needs to go to McCall, there's nowhere to put them. You still got to take them somewhere else. But people don't like change,
now,
and we got to draw the line at some point in time.
If you take the school choice policy away, there are going to be
there's
at
a
least...
difference between the school choice policy and what you're saying. School choice policy was, if McCall was a failing school and Bennettsville was an A school,
that's right.
And I want to move my kids from McCall to Bennettsville because they'll get a better education.
That's right.
We're talking about convenience. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about.
I'm actually reading the school policy right now.
Okay.
It does not mention that.
Well, I say send everybody to their district.
Mr. Chair, I call for the question.
Yep. So, go ahead, Mr. Stone. All in favor? Option
of approving the second reading.
Approving the second reading of 2025-2026 option D plan.
Pending
financial information received. Let it be known by raising your right hand. All in favor? I'm in at 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed? 1, 2, 3. Motion passed. Okay.
I want to say one thing to all that conversation just there. And if we're going to go the route that we're talking about here and versus the route that we had before, it sounds like option C might be better because you're sending kids, all of them together. You send it all to K through here, and you don't have to worry about this kid being dropped off or this kid being left out. But I'm not in favor of option C. I think it's wrong. I think option D is a better option for us. But just be careful where we go with this conversation is all I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm through with that.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
All right. You got a motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting, please.
You get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor now, let me know by raising your right hand. Meeting adjourned.